Hello, I'm Martin Christopher, and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to participate in the Global Smart Supply Chain Summit organized by JD Logistics. Uh, the topic today is future challenges to supply chain management, and this has never been a more challenging time. It doesn't matter what industry we're in or which part of the world we work in. Global supply chains are having to be re-evaluated, reassessed. In many cases, we took decisions some years ago which may no longer be fit for purpose. So I think this is a good time for us all to be taking a fresh look at our supply chain strategy. Um, the current conditions have sometimes been described as a VUCA world, V-U-C-A, V for volatility. Things are turbulent, and as a result, there's a lot of uncertainty. That's the U in VUCA. Who knows what tomorrow's going to bring? It makes the traditional ways of managing by forecasting and planning, it makes those much more difficult um, to pursue as a sort of way in which we run the day-to-day business. We've got to be much more able, I think, to respond rapidly to unexpected changes. And of course, that volatility and that uncertainty combine to create the C word, complexity. I guess it's again a truism to say that our supply chains have never been as complex as they are today. And that brings with it a whole new dimension when it comes to managing supply chains. And then A, for ambiguity. We can't quite be sure what the signals are telling us. What's happening in the marketplace, what's happening on the supply side. Visibility across our supply chains is not always that good. It's like we're operating in a sort of fog, a mist, and not always very clear which direction we should be heading. So that's the sort of backdrop, if you like, to where we are. And you might say, well, how do we get here? We took a lot of decisions, in the 90s and the early years of this century. The lean revolution. Many companies slimmed down, reducing inventories, seeking to maximize the use of capacity. Efficiency was really what it was all about. At the same time, we were globalizing our supply chains. What were previously largely local for local arrangements now span continents. We outsourced a lot of activities we used to do in-house, thus again adding to the complexity of our supply chains, far more relationships that we have to manage now compared to in the past. Also too, I guess, alongside all of this, we were seeking to reduce the supplier base. We were becoming much more dependent on just a few critical suppliers, adding to maybe the risk in our supply chains. And again, many companies looking for economies of scale sought to centralize their manufacturing, their production, and indeed their distribution. Instead of having local arrangements in terms of warehousing, distribution centers, we tended to consolidate, have bigger facilities serving much greater geographies. So all these things together, I think, have created a situation now where our supply chains are increasingly vulnerable to disruption and to these unexpected events in this sort of VUCA world as we described it. It's a little unusual maybe that we're seeing uncertainty not just in the marketplace on the demand side. We're also seeing uncertainty on the supply side. Whereas in the past maybe we had the power. It was we who called the shots, so to speak, and our suppliers had to fall in with what we wanted to do. Now it's often the other way around. But also too, the availability of many of materials and many critical items isn't always that assured. And so I think we're in a sort of interesting situation where we've got uncertainty both on the demand side and the supply side simultaneously. Now, in the past, when we've talked about building resilience into our supply chains to cope with this sort of stress, And there's always been a concern that this is going to cost money. It's like insurance. We spend a lot of money on insurance, and hopefully we never need it. We insure the house, we insure the car, but it's costing money. And so I think the same view has been taken by some companies about resilience. It's like a trade-off. If you want resilience, you've got to spend money. And in these days when cash is tight and efficiency is still a concern, obviously, for everyone, it's a difficult question. But my view on this is that it shouldn't be a trade-off. It should be possible to structure a supply chain architecture which is both resilient and efficient. And I am going to suggest that the way we do this, and this is really where I want to focus, is on improving agility, the ability to move quickly when things change, when things happen, because I think this is the key to resilience, and also the key to efficiency. If we just very briefly say what characterizes an agile business. Well, I guess it's very close to the marketplace. It reads what's happening, not just day by day, but hour by hour. And new developments in information technology are making it possible for us to do this and to use what we now call big data, analytics, and of course artificial intelligence often to help interpret these signals that are coming from the marketplace. So I think that's one of the critical elements of agility, getting close to the market, being able to see what's actually happening, but also too sharing that information upstream and downstream so we can synchronize across our supply chain. So we're all marching to the same drumbeat. Rather than our suppliers having their forecasts, we've got our forecasts, our customers have got a different forecast. We're all working to the same sort of numbers. And obviously this involves much higher levels of collaborative working. We can't achieve this level of synchronization if we don't have a rather different approach to how we manage those relationships. So I think collaborative working and collaborative planning is critical across a supply chain if we're to achieve much higher levels of agility. One of the sort of academic theories that I've always believed in is this idea of that's sometimes called dynamic capabilities. What it says is that the companies who are most likely to succeed in today's VUCA world are those companies who are fastest on their feet. They can make decisions quickly, they can change direction quickly, they don't have investments which have been made some years ago in bricks and mortar, maybe, which have they're like cement. They can't change. It's sort of very difficult to sort of do things quickly in a different sort of way. So these organizations that have these capabilities, as I say, what the academic theorists call dynamic capabilities, are companies typically who've got much higher levels of flexibility. What I've sometimes called structural flexibility, which means that they're able to reconfigure their supply chain arrangements, and they can do this rapidly. They're not sort of tied to the networks that we've, as I say, invested in the past, and the bricks and mortar. Maybe they're using third-party logistics providers. Maybe they're working very closely with contract manufacturers. This idea that says, well, maybe we get flexibility, not necessarily by investing in our own capacity and our own assets, but maybe by investing in other people's assets. And what I mean by that basically is the ability to maybe share, to rent, to lease. We don't have to own assets. In fact, I think in today's world, the ability to sort of work across a portfolio of providers of different capabilities. It's not just manufacturing capacity or logistics capacity we're talking about. It could be knowledge, it could be access to R&D. It's a much more flexible, much more sort of fluid approach that I'm suggesting there. I think this idea that says, we should always be looking for um, the best use of capacity. This has driven our thinking for a long time. Accountants will say if you've got idle capacity, that's bad news. Well, I think actually in today's world, um, having the ability to access capacity, whatever that capacity may be, is actually a really powerful source of competitive advantage, because it enables me to take um, advantage of the uncertainty in this world. I mean, we often think when we talk about uncertainty and risk, it's all bad news. Well, actually, those companies who are able to capitalize on the opportunities presented by risk and uncertainty are the ones who typically are going to be the long-term winners. One of the emerging issues that's getting a lot of attention today in supply chain management is what's sometimes been called the Industry 4.0. It's the sort of revolution in how we manage the sort of man-machine interface. Obviously using IT, and particularly how we capture information in as close to real time as possible, how we use things like artificial intelligence, as I mentioned before, to interpret that information and to help us make decisions and even to anticipate possibly customer requirement. And I think that this is going to reshape the whole architecture of our supply chains. In a way, we talk about supply chain, but it hasn't been a supply chain for a long time. It's been a network. Some call it an ecosystem, where we have many different parts which are all mutually dependent on each other. And so the role increasingly of the supply chain manager is to orchestrate this network, this ecosystem, to make sure that it is actually functioning as one complete interconnected system, not a series of separate entities. And this is a real challenge, because for many years, for centuries, we've been used to sort of working as independent entities. And now we're saying, no, it doesn't work like that anymore. We've got to find a way to go across those boundaries. In a way, I think we're challenging a lot of the sort of mindsets of the past. And this has implications too for training, for education, for management development. What sort of skills are we going to need to manage this VUCA environment and to design supply chains that are capable of being flexible and responding? And then how do we actually manage these? And I think the sort of skills that we're going to need are going to be much more in terms of how we can see things in systems. We can talk the language of complex systems theory. We can talk about interconnections. We can see the big picture, not just our small part of it. And this, I think, is where a lot of the focus in my area, in education, management education, really has to move. It's how do we sort of develop a different sort of manager capable of looking right across boundaries, taking a broader view, understanding how complex systems work. This, I think, is going to be a real sort of interesting period. And, I always say it's not just about the downside of risk, it's also about the upside of risk. And if we can prepare ourselves as companies and organizations to take advantage of that upside, we could indeed be the winners in the long term. So I'm fairly optimistic, even though we're faced with so many challenges at this moment. I think those who are prepared to invest in supply chain design and supply chain talent are going to come out of this looking fairly good. Well, thanks very much for listening to me, and I hope that you found what I've had to say useful and interesting. and hopefully that you'll enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.